Hey, I'm Becca with the Happy Ever Crafter, and in this video I'm going to teach you how to add shading to your lettering. So if you've ever been wondering, like, what side of the letter do I add the shading on? Which side is the light coming from? How do I even know how much shade to put on? What tools do I use to do that? Don't worry, we're going over all of it in this video. So the first thing I want to talk about is this concept of understanding where the light comes from. So pretty much any time you look for a tutorial about shading, you're going to hear about this. And they basically just tell you to think about where the light is coming from and then shade on the other side. But the concept is still completely confusing because our brains just don't really work that way in order to just easily visualize where there would be a shadow. If you could, there'd be no need for this tutorial, obviously. So instead, I came up with a way to do a quick little demo using these kids' fridge magnets to show you what I'm picturing and what I'm talking about when I say where the light comes from. So let me just turn off the light in my room, and I'm going to use this little lamp to show you how the light would affect the shading on some of these letters. The light is off in my studio and I have this lamp that I'm going to turn on, and I'm going to place it in different spots according to that L. So let me show you what happens if I put the lamp in the top left corner and I turn it on. See where the shadow lands? If the lamp is in the top left corner, and depending how I move it around, it'll give you different angles. But if the lamp is in the top left corner, the shadow on that L is in the bottom right. Now, if I move my lamp to the top right corner, the shadow on the L will be in the bottom left. And same thing if I go from the bottom corners. If I go from the bottom right, the shadow is in the top left. And from the bottom left, the shadow is in the top right. So this is what people mean when they say, picture where the light is coming from, because wherever the light is coming from, your shadow is going to be opposite. So this is just a really good way that you can test out where the shadows would go. And the more you do this and the more you work with shading and all of that, the less you'll need to do this. It'll just become kind of second nature and you'll understand where those shadows should go. But I'm going to show you next how to actually do this in lettering. And then I'm going to show you 2 more hacks that you can do if you don't happen to have any of these letters like this hanging around. So let's say I wanted to do lettering of an H and I wanted to do this kind of shadowing on it. So to do this with lettering, I'm just going to use a normal Sharpie marker to doodle that H. And then I'm using Tombow brush pens that are gray to add the shadowing. You can use any marker you want. It doesn't have to be a brush pen. You just want a lighter color than what you're doing your letter with. So I'm just going to draw my H out. And then I'm going to take my lighter gray Tombow pen and I'm going to start adding the shading where I see it on this H. So like I said a couple times, you can see it in the bottom and the left of all of these spots. And you'll notice that the top corner of all of these shades is angled the same way. So it's angled depending on where the light is hitting. And so I'm just going to follow those angles and draw in my shading. Now this is a really light shadow. If you want it to be darker, you can just go over it a couple times. And so I'm just copying exactly where the shading is with my lit up example over here. So you could stop there and that would actually just be the shadow of how it looks on here. But one thing that I really think always looks really cool is adding a little bit more dimension with a darker gray Tombow pen and a Uniball Sino gel pen. So this is just a white gel pen. It doesn't have to be this exact brand, but it could be any. And you just add a little bit more depth to it. So what you're going to do is take your darker color and put it either on the bottom side of the shadows or on the left side of the shadows, but not both. So what I mean by that is if I wanted it to stand out a little bit more, I would add shading, extra shading, just on one side of these. So anywhere that there's an underneath part, I'm adding more shading. And then I'm going to take my white gel pen and I'm going to go around just the left and the bottom edges of the H in between the black part and the shadow. Now, you won't always have a lamp and these kids magnets hanging around, and so I want to show you a couple different really quick hacks that you can use to do shading like this and understand where the shadow goes without having to do this technique. So shading hack number one is to use tracing paper. So if you don't have those letters lying around and you want to see where your shadow is going to go, you can do this using tracing paper. So I just have a random piece of tracing paper here. It could be tracing paper, marker paper, whatever you like. Doesn't matter what brand it is. And then I have the same pens that I was using earlier. So just my Sharpie and my Tombow, gray Tombow pen. So first thing I'm going to do is draw out, let's use that same letter H again. I'm going to draw it out with my Tombow pen. Now I'm going to put the tracing paper over top and I'm going to trace over it with my Sharpie pen. And then to see where your shadow would go, all you're going to do is move your tracing paper around and you can see the outline of your shadow in behind. So all you would have to do at this point now is take your marker again and trace over where those shadows went. Now you'll notice in these examples, I don't have that angled line that I had in my first example. You can add it in if you want, or you can leave it as just sort of an offset shadow like it would be in this example. And of course, I'm doing this on the tracing paper now, but if you wanted to do this as like a final project and you needed to have it on good paper, you could either use this just as a reference, or you could put it under a light box and shine the shadow through so that when you trace through, you get the effect you're looking for and you can see where your shadow should go. Now, of course, I'm showing this to you with block letters because it's a little bit easier to illustrate, but you could do this also with calligraphy. So let's say I wanted to write the word hi in calligraphy. I'm going to make it nice and thick just to demonstrate for you guys, because it's easier to see on the camera like this. Okay, so let's say I wanted to add a shadow to this word hi, and I'm completely overwhelmed about where the shading would go. So again, I'm gonna put my tracing paper over top. I'm gonna trace that over in Sharpie. And then again, I'm just gonna slide it over and I can see exactly where my shadow should go. So now that makes it really easy to go over it and add in the shading. So for this example, I'm gonna do something a little bit different just to demonstrate a different technique. I'm gonna use just a normal monoline pen. This is just a micron pen. And I'm gonna add in those shadows just as a line instead of a shade with the Tombow. So I'm just tracing the outline of where these shadows land. And I move it away. I have sort of a 3D letter. So that's the tracing paper hack. Hack number 2 for shading is actually one of my favorites, and I use it all the time on my Instagram stories. But this one, you're going to use your Instagram story to just see where the shading should go and use it to help you with your hand lettering. So all you're going to do is open up an Instagram story and take a blank picture and then start typing a word. So I'm writing the word shading here. I'm going to put it in a gray color, and then I'm going to make it nice and big on the screen. Then I'm going to type the exact same word and do it in black and make it the exact same size or as close as I can. And then all you have to do is move it around to see where the shading would go. So this is like the tracing paper trick, except you can just do it right on your phone to get the idea of where you should put your shadows, and then you can use it as a reference when you're doing your hand lettering. So again, once you've tried these different hacks I've showed you a couple of times, understanding where your shadows should go becomes much easier, and you end up just being able to do it from memory. So hopefully that video gave you some ideas of how to add shading to your work. And if you're ready now to add some different styles of lettering to your projects, like block letters, check out this video where I went over my process for coming up with block letters. And I'll see you next time.